My parents forgot they had me at their vow renewal. I was the photographer. What if the one day you're hired to capture a family's perfect memories, you discover you were the one they erased from theirs? My name is Clara, and I'm 22 years old. My life story, for the longest time, felt like a photograph with a crucial piece torn out of the center. I grew up in the system, a quiet child shuffled from one foster home to another, a constant visitor in other people's lives. My only anchor, my one true constant, was a camera. My first, a beat-up Polaroid I bought at a flea market with saved-up allowance, became my voice. It allowed me to capture the moments of connection I so desperately craved, to frame the love I saw in other families, and maybe, just maybe, understand what it looked like. Photography became my refuge, my art, and eventually, my profession. I was good at it too. I had an eye for the unspoken emotion, the fleeting glance, the raw, unfiltered truth that people tried to hide behind polished smiles. That's probably why the Vance vow renewal landed in my lap. It was a high-profile job, the kind that could pay my rent for 6 months and put my portfolio on the map. The client, a woman who'd only identified herself as E, had been meticulous, demanding a photographer with a photojournalistic, candid style. She wanted the raw emotion, not the stiff poses. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The venue was a sprawling botanical garden overlooking the Pacific, a place so extravagantly beautiful it felt unreal. Wisteria hung like purple waterfalls from trellises, and the air was thick with the scent of 1,000 roses. I arrived early, as I always do, to walk the grounds, to feel the light, to plan my shots. I watched as the staff put the finishing touches on an archway adorned with white peonies and baby's breath. It was a fairy tale, the kind of event I usually photographed with a sense of detached admiration. I was a ghost, flitting around the edges of other people's happiness, capturing it for them to hold on to. But today, a strange sense of unease settled over me, a premonition I couldn't shake. As I adjusted the settings on my primary camera, a Canon that felt like an extension of my own arm, I saw them for the first time. The couple. They were standing by the cliff's edge, their backs to me, watching the sunset paint the ocean in hues of orange and violet. He was tall, with a confident posture, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist. She was slender, elegant, with a cascade of dark hair that caught the light. Even from a distance, there was something about them, a familiarity that pricked at the corners of my memory like a forgotten song. I dismissed it as nerves, the pressure of the big job. I raised my camera, zooming in to get a feel for the scene, to frame the silhouette against the dramatic sky. As I focused, the woman turned her head slightly, laughing at something her husband whispered. The lens captured her profile, the line of her jaw, the specific way her eyes crinkled at the corners. And in that instant, the world tilted on its axis. A cold, electric shock shot through me, so visceral I almost dropped my camera. It couldn't be. It was impossible. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the serene twilight. I had seen that face before, not in a client meeting or on a social media profile, but in a worn, faded photograph I had kept hidden in the bottom of an old shoebox for 20 years, the only picture I had of my mother. My hands were shaking. I forced them to steady, taking a deep, ragged breath that did little to calm the storm raging inside me. This was a professional gig, a career-making gig. I couldn't have a meltdown in the middle of a wisteria-drenched paradise. I had to pull it together. I lowered my camera, my mind racing, trying to logic its way out of the insane conclusion my heart had already jumped to. It was a coincidence, a doppelganger. There were probably millions of women in the world who looked like the ghost from my past. But the feeling, that gut-wrenching jolt of recognition, wouldn't subside. It grew stronger, a low hum beneath my skin. I decided to do what I do best, observe from a distance. I spent the next hour photographing the details, the delicate lace on the bride's dress that was delivered on a satin hanger, the engraved wedding bands resting on a bed of rose petals, the place cards written in elegant calligraphy. I was a machine, my fingers working the dials and shutter button on muscle memory, while my brain was a chaotic mess of what-ifs. The ceremony was about to begin. Guests started to arrive, a sea of well-dressed, smiling people who all seemed to move with an easy grace I had never known. They were the kind of people who belonged in a world like this, a world of private gardens and catered champagne. I was an imposter in my own life, and now I was potentially an imposter in theirs. I positioned myself at the side of the aisle, a perfect vantage point. The music started, a soft string quartet, and then she appeared. Eleanor, the bride. Her father, a man with a kind face and silver hair, escorted her down the petal-strewn path. As she walked toward the arch, her eyes were fixed on her groom, and I, through the long lens of my camera, was forced to stare directly at her face. There was no doubt. The high cheekbones, the full lips, the slightly upturned nose. It was her, 20 years older, polished, radiant with happiness. But it was her, my mother, the woman who had given birth to me and then vanished from my life, leaving me with nothing but a name, Elena, and a single damning photograph. I felt the air leave my lungs, a silent scream trapped in my chest. I kept shooting. The click of the shutter was the only sound I could hear over the roaring in my ears. I captured her reaching the altar, taking her groom's hands. I captured his face as he looked at her with pure, unadulterated adoration. And then my lens panned to him, to the man who was about to renew his vows to the woman who had abandoned me. I didn't recognize him at first. He was older, of course, his face lined with the kind of character that comes with a comfortable life. But as he smiled, a wide, easy smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, I saw it. The shape of his mouth, the set of his jaw. It was the face from the photograph, too. The young man with the hopeful eyes, holding a baby he would soon forget. My father. They were here, together, celebrating their love, their commitment, their life. A life that had, apparently, never included me. The officiant began to speak, his voice a warm, melodic drone that washed over the assembled guests. He spoke of Richard and Eleanor, of their 20-year journey, of the love that had not only endured but had deepened with time. 20 years. The number echoed in the hollow space where my heart used to be. 20 years ago, they had made their vows, and in the same year, they had made the decision to leave me at a hospital, a nameless newborn in a world that already felt too full. I continued to work, my body moving on autopilot while my mind fractured into a million sharp pieces. I was a child again, sitting in a sterile social worker's office, being told a story I could never quite make sense of. Your parents were very young, Clara, the kind-faced woman had said. They weren't ready for the responsibility of a child. It wasn't your fault. It was the standard line, the one they gave to kids like me to soften the blow. But I had always held on to the photograph, a tiny, creased image of a young couple gazing down at a bundle of blankets. I had built a fantasy around it. Maybe they were poor. Maybe they were forced. Maybe they thought about me every single day, their hearts aching with a regret so profound it was unbearable. I had spent 20 years crafting a narrative that allowed them to believe they were good people who had made a terrible, tragic choice. Looking at them now, bathed in the golden light of a perfect California afternoon, that narrative crumbled into dust. They didn't look like people haunted by a past tragedy. They looked like people who had won the lottery. They looked happy, unburdened. As the ceremony progressed, I forced myself to study them, to truly see them through the lens. I watched Richard repeat his vows, his voice thick with emotion. I watched a single perfect tear trace a path down Eleanor's cheek. There was no shadow of a hidden sorrow in their eyes, no flicker of a painful memory. There was only the present moment, a bubble of blissful perfection. They had forgotten. Or worse, they had chosen to erase me so completely that there was nothing left to remember. The officiant pronounced them renewed in their commitment, and Richard dipped Eleanor back in a classic, movie-perfect kiss. The guests erupted in applause and cheers. The sound was a physical assault, a celebration of a lie. I felt a surge of something hot and bitter rise in my throat. It was a mixture of rage and a profound, soul-crushing sadness. I was a ghost at their feast, a phantom limb they had long since amputated. After the ceremony, while the guests mingled and sipped cocktails, I slipped away to a quiet corner to review the shots on my camera's display. The images were technically perfect, the lighting was divine, the compositions were strong, and the emotions were raw and palpable. I had captured their fairy tale with stunning clarity, and in doing so, I had documented the most profound betrayal of my own life. As I scrolled through the photos, I noticed a small tent card on a nearby table that I hadn't photographed before. It was a seating chart for the reception dinner. My eyes scanned the names, a list of strangers, and then I saw it. Head table. Richard Vance. Eleanor Vance. Vance. My last name. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with the sickening finality of a coffin lid slamming shut. It wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was a fact. The name Vance hung in the air around me, a silent accusation. My entire identity, the one thing I had carried with me through a dozen different homes and schools, was a brand from the very people who had discarded me. I felt a dizzying sense of unreality, as if I had stepped through the looking glass into a world where I was simultaneously present and completely invisible. My camera, my trusted tool, my shield, now felt like a cage. For the next hour, I was tasked with orchestrating the family portraits. It was a special kind of hell. I, the forgotten daughter, had to position my parents and their smiling relatives just so, telling them to move a little closer, to tilt their heads, to give me real, authentic joy. Richard, put your arm around Eleanor. Perfect. Now, look at her like she's the only person in the world. He did, and I captured it. The look on his face was so full of love, it made me want to be sick. Eleanor, rest your head on his shoulder. Beautiful. She did, her eyes closing in contentment. I captured that too. Each click of the shutter was a small act of self-flagellation. I was the architect of their perfect memories, the silent witness to their joy, the curator of their lie. I searched their faces for any crack in the facade, any hint of a buried memory, any flicker of guilt that might surface when I looked into the lens of my camera. But there was nothing. Their smiles were genuine, their laughter easy. They were completely, blissfully unaware of the specter in their midst, the girl with their eyes and their last name, documenting their happiness. I felt a strange, detached sense of power. I held their history in my hands. These digital files were more than just pictures. They were evidence of a life lived without me. I could delete them. I could alter them. I could post them online with a caption that would shatter their perfect world in an instant. The temptation was a dark, seductive whisper at the edge of my consciousness. But I was a professional. And more than that, I was a survivor. I had spent my life learning to control my emotions, to build walls around my heart so high that no one could get in. I wouldn't let them break me now. I would finish the job. I would take their money, and I would walk away. It was the only thing I knew how to do. The portrait session ended, and the guests began to make their way to the reception hall, a grand pavilion strung with fairy lights. I took a moment to myself, leaning against the trunk of an old oak tree, the rough bark digging into my back. I closed my eyes, trying to slow my breathing, to regain some semblance of control. That's when I heard a voice, soft and polite, coming from beside me. "Excuse me, dear. You're the photographer, aren't you?" I opened my eyes. Standing before me was an older woman, her face a kinder, softer version of Eleanor's. She had the same dark hair, now streaked with silver, and the same elegant features. She was holding a glass of champagne and smiling at me with a warmth that felt completely alien. It was Eleanor's mother, my grandmother, and she had no idea who I was. My grandmother. The word was a foreign concept, a character from a story that wasn't mine. I had never allowed myself to imagine having grandparents. It was a luxury, a fantasy too painful to entertain. And yet here she was, a living, breathing person who shared my blood, looking at me with nothing but simple, unguarded curiosity. I managed a tight smile, my throat too thick to form words. I just nodded. "You're doing a wonderful job," she continued, her voice pleasant. "Absolutely wonderful. Eleanor is just thrilled. She said you captured the exact feeling she was hoping for." She took a sip of her champagne, her eyes drifting over to the pavilion where her daughter was laughing with a group of friends. "She's always been such a romantic, my Ellie. From the time she was a little girl, all she ever wanted was a grand love story. And Richard, he's just been perfect for her. They complete each other." Every word was a paper cut. Little Ellie, the romantic. She painted a picture of a cherished, beloved daughter, a girl who was given everything, a girl whose life had been a straight, sun-drenched path to this very moment, a path that had deliberately gone around me. "They always said they never wanted children," the woman added, a wistful look on her face. "They wanted their life to be just about the two of them, their adventures, their careers. I must admit, I was a little disappointed at first, but seeing them now, so happy, you can't argue with that, can you? You just have to let people live their own truth." There it was, the confirmation. It wasn't a tragedy of circumstance. It wasn't a mistake made out of desperation. It was a choice, a conscious, deliberate decision to exclude me from their grand love story. They hadn't been too young or too poor. They had just been too selfish. The final fragile thread of hope I had been clinging to for 20 years snapped. The fantasy of the grieving, regretful parents evaporated, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of two people who had decided their lives would be better without me in them. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The rage, the sadness, the confusion, it all receded, leaving behind a vast, empty quiet. I was no longer a part of their story. I never had been. I was just a footnote they had torn out of the book. I excused myself, mumbling something about needing to get more shots of the reception, and walked away. I moved through the party like a phantom, my camera raised, my finger on the shutter. I captured the cutting of the cake, Richard smearing a bit of frosting on Eleanor's nose. I captured their first dance as a renewed couple, swaying under the twinkling lights, lost in their own little world. I watched them laugh. I watched them kiss. I watched them celebrate the life they had built on the foundation of my absence. And I felt nothing. The numbness was a shield, a suit of armor I had spent a lifetime forging. As the night wore on, the guests became more boisterous, the music louder. I was packing up my secondary lens, getting ready to make my final rounds, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see Richard standing there, my father, his face flushed from champagne and happiness. He held out a glass to me. "We couldn't have done this without you," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "You're a true artist. Thank you for capturing our day so perfectly." Our day. The words hung in the air between us. I took the glass, my fingers brushing against his. For a fleeting second, his eyes met mine. The smile on his face faltered, just for a moment. A flicker of something crossed his features, not recognition, not quite, but a flicker of confusion, of curiosity. As if he were looking at a face he felt he should know, but couldn't place from where. He blinked, and the look was gone, replaced by his usual easygoing charm. He clapped me on the shoulder and moved on, rejoining his wife. But that tiny moment, that brief, almost imperceptible spark of connection, had shattered my carefully constructed numbness. That flicker in my father's eyes was a lit match thrown on a field of dry grass. It reignited everything, the hope, the anger, the pain. It was the first crack I had seen in the perfect veneer of their new life. Did he feel it? A ghost of a memory? A phantom limb? Or was it just my own desperate imagination projecting meaning onto a random, meaningless glance? I didn't know, but it changed everything. The reception was winding down, the band was playing its last set, and the guests were starting to say their goodbyes. I had done my job. I had hundreds, maybe thousands of perfect, beautiful, heartbreaking photos. I could pack up my gear, send the invoice, and disappear back into the shadows of my own life. It was the safe option, the sane option. It was what Clara, the survivor, the girl who had learned to protect herself above all else, would do. But that look in his eyes had awakened another part of me, the part of me that was still a little girl, holding a faded photograph, wondering why. For the first time, I had a choice. Not about my past, I couldn't change that, but about my future. I could walk away and they would live out their days in blissful ignorance, their perfect, curated life intact. I would be left with the questions, the what-ifs, forever. Or I could step out of the shadows. I could introduce myself. I could be the earthquake that shatters their perfect world. I could demand answers. I could force them to see me, to acknowledge the life they had discarded. The thought was terrifying. It would be messy. It would be painful. There would be tears and anger and denial. It would destroy the beautiful facade of this day, and possibly their entire relationship. But it would also be the truth. And for 22 years, my life had been defined by a lie. I watched them from across the now emptying dance floor. They were saying their final goodbyes to the last of the guests, their arms wrapped around each other, looking exhausted but deliriously happy. They were a unit, a complete circle, and I was on the outside, looking in. This was my last chance. In a few minutes, they would be gone. I would be just a memory, a vendor who provided a service, the photographer with the sad eyes. My heart was a wild bird beating against my ribs. My palms were slick with sweat. I thought of all the foster homes, all the times I had looked at other families and wondered where mine was. And here they were, my family. They just didn't know it yet. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of champagne and cut grass. I thought of the little girl in the photograph, the baby in their arms. She deserved an answer. I deserved an answer. I left my camera bag by a tree. I wouldn't be needing it anymore. I smoothed down my dress, ran a hand through my hair, and started walking toward them. Each step felt like it was taking an eternity. The world narrowed to a tunnel, and at the end of it was them, Richard and Eleanor Vance, my parents. They were just turning to leave, their backs to me, heading toward the exit where a car would be waiting to whisk them away to their perfect life. I was 10 feet away. 5. I opened my mouth to speak, to say the words that would irreversibly change all of our lives. "Excuse me." The words hung in the air, small and fragile, but they were enough. They both stopped and turned, their expressions questioning but not yet alarmed. They saw a young woman, the photographer from their wedding, her face pale in the dim fairy lights. I saw them up close, for the first time, not through the distance of a lens. I saw the faint lines around Eleanor's eyes, the way Richard's hair was thinning just a little at the temples. They were real. They were flawed. They were human. And in that moment, I saw something else too. I saw a lifetime of happiness between them, a history that was so deep and so intertwined that there was no space for a third person. There was no room for me. The anger, the need for confrontation, the desperate desire for answers, it all just drained out of me, leaving behind a profound and weary clarity. What would I accomplish by telling them? A scene? A dramatic, tearful confession? Would it make them love me? No. It would only make me a problem to be managed, a complication in their perfect story. It would force a connection that was never there to begin with. My strength, I realized, had never come from them. It had come from their absence. It had come from learning to stand on my own 2 feet, from building my own world from the ground up, from finding my own voice behind a camera. My identity wasn't something they had taken from me. It was something I had built myself, brick by painful brick. To reveal myself now would be to hand that power back to them, to let them back into the driver's seat of my life. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't give them that. I looked at their expectant faces and I gave them a small, sad smile. "I just forgot to give you my card," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "for the final gallery." Eleanor's face softened with relief. "Oh, of course. Thank you so much again for everything." Richard just nodded, a warm, friendly smile on his face. The flicker I had seen earlier was gone, if it had ever been there at all. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. As her fingers took it, I felt a final, gentle sense of closure. I wasn't the ghost from their past anymore. I was just the photographer. I turned and walked away without looking back. I didn't go back to my camera bag right away. I walked to the edge of the cliff, looking out at the vast, dark ocean. The wind whipped my hair around my face, and for the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't running away. I was choosing to leave. There's a difference. A few days later, I sat in my small apartment, editing the photos. I sent them the final gallery, a collection of perfect, happy moments. I received an email back from Eleanor. "Clara, they are absolutely breathtaking. You captured our day better than we ever could have imagined. Thank you for giving us these memories that we will cherish forever. All the best, Eleanor Vance." I read the email once, and then I deleted it. I looked around my apartment, at the prints on my walls, the photographs I had taken of my own life, my own chosen family of friends. My story wasn't about the parents who forgot me. It was about the girl who learned how to remember herself. My name is Clara. I'm 22 years old, and my story is just beginning.